Today we're talking about Friedrich Nietzsche's classic Also sprach Zarathustra, or Thus Spake Zarathustra. Um, and this is a book that's been on my list to read for a long time. I've read a lot of Nietzsche sporadically over the years. A lot of stuff from Genealogy of Morals, from The Joyful Science, um, a lot of stuff from Menschlich allzu Menschlich, or Human allzu Human, and then a lot of selections from here. But this is my first time actually going through the book from beginning to end. Um, and it seems like a perfect follow to what we've been talking about in the Brothers Karamazov. And it's a good leisurely start to the summer, I think. It's lots of little chunks of vignettes and maxims and things like this. It's easy to pick up and just read a few chapters like in a sitting and then set it down and go back to whatever you're doing. So, yeah, I don't know about you, but is Nietzsche your beach reading this summer? Because I think I'll enjoy reading Nietzsche on the beach. The beach seems like a nice place to, just relax. No laws apply to you. There's nothing you need to do. It seems like a perfect place to be in Übermensch. So yeah, let me know. Hey there, Debbie. How's it going? Let me know in the chat what your first impressions are, um, how the book is treating you, what you think of Nietzsche. What do you think of his style? I think a big part of this book is just his style, and that he wanted to do this prophetic, poetic kind of approach to philosophy rather than like a normal, like a normal treatise or something like that. Um, and so I think style plays a big role in this and what he was trying to do. He's explored with other styles, especially if you look at like Human All Too Human. Can't remember the other one off the top of my head, but he did a lot of collections of aphorisms at the time. And so Nietzsche's really good at doing, like the really good one liner and then moving on, which is, aphorisms are nothing but one liners. Um, so, yeah, I'm personally really enjoying the style so far. Um, and I think it's nice that he doesn't belabor points. Sometimes I feel, when you read a more thorough person like a Kant or a Hegel, they feel they need to spell out every little thing. Um, and one of my favorite lines about philosophy and why it's not as good as it used to be actually came from a guy who loved this book, Nikolai Berdayev. And he said the reason philosophy is terrible these days is because we feel we need to explain every reason for everything that we believe. And the thing is, axioms and maxims can never really be proven. You kind of just need to be a part of them. So he says that the problem with philosophy today is that we need to explain everything. He said, but you don't have to explain everything to your friends. And so I find that there's something of a friend in Nietzsche, um, where he doesn't feel like he needs to explain things. This is not a user's manual for the car of your life. It's not super detailed. It's a few good ideas that he wants to share with you. And then you can take them and run with them, or you can leave them. And these are the same conversations that I have with my friends. We share a few ideas, something someone thinks. We agree for a little while, then we disagree for a while. And he seems to he seems to give me the spirit of friendship in this book, which is odd because he's also a very antagonistic kind of author. There's obviously people that he's speaking against throughout the book. Nietzsche's definitely a person who has a chip on his shoulder. Once again, he's a pastor's kid, so he has his problems with religion being overbearing and having people tell him what he needs to do with his life. And he was a real loner. And so, I'm sure we all have like our part of ourselves that is frustrated and can't express itself and feels that it's, burdened by other people's expectations and whatnot. Some obviously, like, there you find lots of people in their adolescence, young men in their adolescence, who get into Nietzsche, and that's because your adolescence and your early 20s, when you take your first philosophy class, that's also a time when you're trying to form your self identity. You're trying to create yourself outside of your parents' wings. And an angsty person like Nietzsche, who's trying to do that, really goes along well with someone going through that phase. But I think it's a little bit of an injustice to Nietzsche to claim that he's only for angsty incel young men. I feel that there's part of us that is always trying to express itself and always thwarted in that, and yet still doesn't want to give up that vocation of finding out who you are and making that person come to be. Um, so those are, yeah, just kind of my initial thoughts. Um, let me check in with the comments here and see what yours are. Let's see. I believe if you check in the top corner, you can see who else is in there. I only see a number off the top of my head. I'm still a little nervous about clicking things and afraid that I might make the chat go away or whatever. Let's see. I thought I had read Aldo Sprach's Zarathustra, but could not find it with my other Nietzsche books, so I ordered a new copy. It came after I left the house this morning. I found the Gutenberg version. Okay. Yeah. Let's see. The Gutenberg version is from Thomas Kamen. This one's from Walter Kaufmann. I have the original German here as well, and I've been comparing the two, as I'm reading. I'll read this one for a little while. I'll read this one. And I've opened up the Gutenberg one for quick reference on the chat. And it's a pretty straightforward read. There aren't too many things. There's a few things on, like, whether or not you translate Untergehen, like the going under. If you translate that literally as like the sun setting, which I think Thomas Kamen, did that, where Walter Kaufmann was a little bit more literal, where whenever Nietzsche uses the word goes under, he wasn't going to use a word like descend, or he wasn't going to use the word like set, but he was going to use Untergehen because Nietzsche has these puns and these contrasts that he does between Untergehen and Übermensch, and how the Zarathustra is going under, but the Übermensch is going above and over. But I think he translates pretty well. I don't think that there's necessarily anything that's really confusing that needs to be interpreted so much. But let's see here. I disagree that it's a few good ideas. The first 80 pages are filled with layered and layered ideas that I hear as the likely sources of some of Osho's wisdom. There are also deep mystical truths that can only be appreciated if you are a mystic. Interesting. Yeah. I read a little while ago something on the Rhineland mystics. So the Rhineland mystics were Germans in the Middle Ages. I believe they mostly wrote in High Middle German. And I get all those old dialects like really messed up. It's kind of like the difference between Old English, Middle English, and early modern English. German had the same development. So you have these people like Hildegard von Bingen and Meister Eckhart. Later, you have people like Jakob Böhme, which I think still kind of fall in that category. And the interesting thing when you look back at these Rhineland mystics is they have this deeply Platonic kind of mysticism about them that actually works really well with Eastern religions. That there's this big sense of like the Grund or the Urgrund or the Ungrund, like there's this this needing to go back to the fundamental source of things, the ground, and that all of life desires to return to its source and be reunited with it. And there's a lot of that stuff that you can find in Hindu metaphysics, a lot that you can find in Buddhist metaphysics. Um, and there's stuff that you can find, even in like the original Zoroaster, in Zoroastrianism or Mendaism, if you prefer that term, um, where it's a kind of a similar thing. Um, so it's interesting that Nietzsche is kind of outgrowing his normal Western Christian roots, but there's already a pedigree established for that in the German vocabulary and how we describe certain, concepts. Heidegger famously said there's only two languages that you can do metaphysics in, and they're Greek and German, because they deal so fundamentally with certain ideas, whereas Latin and French and all those other romantic derived languages, they are, already 1 degree removed from Latin, and Latin borrowed a lot of its concepts from Greek. So anyway, Nietzsche was a philologist, and he would have loved that little digression about etymologies and the ability to communicate fundamental realities. Um, but I want to tag back also something that Debbie brought up on Osho. Uh, I wonder if it's just because, Osho, as the leader of, like a spiritual community, some would call it a cult. Um, Other people, would call it mysticism, like he has a prophetic role. And so a prophet is called upon to give you kind of bold truths in a way that kind of disrupts you. And so, like there's that famous clip of his that's been going around on the internet where he talks about how, democracy is a rule by the retarded for the retarded, all of that kind of stuff. And that's shocking in our time because that word's not as um, common or accepted, but it was shocking at his time too. So I wonder if that's just part of the game, being a guru, being a spiritual leader, being a prophet. You have to say things in ways that shake people. Um, but yeah, you're right. There are layers and layers in that beginning. Let's see. Osho read a lot of books and kept notes on all of them. I have the count somewhere. Wow. Yeah, I need to watch that Wild Wild Country series again. It's been a little while, but I'm gonna jump in here now and let's actually. You mentioned the camel, the lion, and the child, and so let's just kind of like walk through and find out, what there is to comment on here. Um, so yeah, actually, before we get to the three metamorphoses, it was interesting that we start off with that idea of the tightrope walker, that image, and how you have this jester character that is on the tightrope walker's way, or he's coming up behind him, and he's like, "I'll tickle your heel, unless you pick up the pace." And then he jumps over him, and then this causes the disturbance for the tightrope walker, and then he falls to his death, and he dies on the ground in front of Zarathustra. And this is an interesting one because I look at the tightrope walker and I assume that he's the hero of this little vignette. And then part of me wonders, but wait, is the jester actually more of the Ubermensch? I mean, because he literally jumps over this person, um, where this person and their development was in his way. And so the jester wasn't going to have any of that. And so he found a way over him, and the jester didn't fall to his death, but this guy did. Um, and I find that there's several points in the book that kind of, I find subvert me. Where when I think I know at face value what Nietzsche's trying to get at, I see that he's actually um, the other person in the story might actually be the one that he values more. Um, Whether or not that's the person I need to value, well, that's Nietzsche would say that's up for me to decide. Um, but yeah, I thought that maybe that the jester character was a little bit more of the person that Zarathustra looked up to. So I'll let you come to your own on that one. Maybe the rope is the hero. Maybe. Yeah, and then we have the eagle and the serpent that he sees in the sky. You know, that the proudest animal and the wisest animal are kind of like giving their blessing to Zarathustra as he comes into that town. But yeah, then we have the three metamorphoses. We have the camel, who's a beast of burden. Um, and then we have the lion. Well, first of all, we have the three metamorphoses. And these are three metamorphoses that a person can go through in his or her life. And so at one stage of your life, you may be a camel, and most of us are. We're beasts of burdens who have day jobs and we have expectations, and we're willing to suffer them and carry them. And that's our virtue: is how much can you endure? But there comes a time when someone can move to the next stage. And I thought it was interesting. I wrote one of my first posts on this part. There's, in addition to these three stages of the camel, the lion, the child, there's also a dragon in the middle. And that there's the dragon that is the conflict that creates the lion. It's the dragon covered in his thou shalts, and you should do this and you should do that. there there's something about this dragon, no matter like how right he seems or how impressive he seems, he becomes insufferable, he becomes intolerable. And there's something in us, the lion within us needs to jump up and utter its holy no, um, to roar this I will, against the I shall. Um, and yeah, I think it's interesting to, just kind of keep track of, what your dragon might be in a given time. Um, let's see here. Connection might be a little unstable. I think it's interesting to just check out what is the dragon that you might be facing at this time that's going to be the cause for you to move from being a camel to a lion, to say that you don't need to endure this anymore. No one's impressed by your suffering. It's not serving you anymore. Now is the time when you need to put your foot down and say no more, and then become a lion. This is kind of the benefit of, some nihilism, to say that there comes a point when you realize that there are some things that were illusory, and you need to say no to them. Um, and like, that's good. We shouldn't only have, like gas pedals in us that go. We need to also have the brakes in us which stop. And so I think the dragon's an important part of this, and not to be skipped over when we're looking at the three stages. So you have a lion that is saying no, and then it's followed by the child, which is a yes, which is a holy yes, he says, the sacred yes, and that there's an innocence to the child. I mean, I have a 2-year-old, and he's nothing but joy and play and freedom. And like, that's what we, would like to not lose in our life. However, we often do lose it, where we start as children, and then we become camels, and then maybe we um, go through the dragon to lion process. But yeah, I just think it's interesting that we have this innocence and we have this joy, of being children, and we have this play. And if you have a toddler, you know that there are no rules, and if there are rules, they're barely followed. But you also kind of, there's not that much expectation that they need to do. They need to play, and it's healthy and it's fun. And I think that we lose sight of this because we start to think that our jobs are all that we are, or our relationships are all we are, or our friendships, and we forget that there's room for play. So while Nietzsche calls this the last step in a metamorphosis, I think it's helpful for us also to remember that it was the first step. We started off as children, and then we moved to being camels. So rather than thinking that this is some kind of unnatural tack on at the end, maybe it's better to think of it as a beginning that we lost track of. So let's see here. We move along, and there's this great part where he talks about, this is all about style. When he's talking about on reading and writing, of all that is written, I love only what man has written with his blood. Write with blood, and you will experience that blood is spirit. And that everyone may learn to read in the long run corrupts not only writing, but also thinking. Once the spirit was God, then he became man, and now he becomes rabble. Whoever writes in blood and aphorisms does not want to be read, but to be learned by heart. In the mountains, the shortest way is from peak to peak, but for that one must have long legs. Aphorisms should be peaks, and those who are addressed, tall and lofty. The air thin and pure, danger near, and the spirit full of gay sarcasm, these go together well. I want to have goblins around me, for I am courageous. Courage that puts ghosts to flight creates goblins for itself. Courage wants to laugh. And then it goes on. So this idea that why does Nietzsche write in an aphoristic style? It's because he's appealing to the peak in you. That when you read someone like Kant and Hegel that need to spell everything out, they start at a peak and they trudge through the valley, and they make you go through the valley. But there's something about Nietzsche that by giving you the peaks, he encourages you to use your long legs, maybe grow some wings and just go from this peak to the other, because as the crow flies or as the eagle flies, it's much quicker that way. And you might have a set of wings that you didn't know that you had. And yeah, that's an interesting way that his style reflects his philosophy. What he's trying to do stylistically is what he's trying to encourage you to do in your exercise of your will and your virtues. So I think this is a beautiful balance of form and function. And then in the same thing, we saw here briefly that he said, once the spirit was God, then he became man, and now he becomes rabble. It's easy to say that Nietzsche is an atheist, and many people think of him as the arch atheist. And I mean, he wrote a book calling himself the Antichrist. And so, like, he takes that atheism quite well. But I think that there's also like a subversive theological point that Nietzsche can always make, where Nietzsche is a critique of religion, but that isn't necessarily to say it's a critique of God per se. To say that religion has gotten God wrong is not to say that God does not exist. And in the same thing, he says that the spirit was God, and then it became man, and then it became rabble, where there might be a God which Nietzsche would believe in. And in fact, he tells us which God he would believe in. And he says, I would only believe in a God who could dance. And when I saw my devil, I found him serious, thorough, profound, and solemn. It was the spirit of gravity. Through him all things fall. Not by wrath does one kill, but by laughter. Come, let us kill the spirit of gravity. I mean, this stuff is great. And he would believe in a God who dances. But the interesting thing is when he says he saw that his devil was serious, thorough, profound, and solemn, the spirit of gravity. I have to say, as a German who knows a lot of Germans and has read a lot of German philosophers, they often tend to be the serious, thorough, profound, and solemn kind of people. Um, they're less often the people known for dancing out of the Europeans. So if he was talking against something, I mean, he's surrounded by people he probably doesn't want to emulate. But if Nietzsche had found himself in Greece, and everyone's dancing, maybe he wouldn't have had such a chip on his shoulder. But, again, his being a pastor's kid in, a very strict, pious, pietistic, evangelisch or Lutheran church, it's a different culture. And I think partly what he's getting at is he's going against a culture and he's going against a religion. And to Debbie's earlier point, that's probably why Osho and Nietzsche, do have such a connection, because at that time, um, he was starting, this spiritual community in this commune. Again, some people would call it a cult. But this guy, what he was doing, it was something that was countercultural. It was offering a cultural alternative, and it was offering a religious or a spiritual alternative. And that's what, you know, really makes him scandalous. And that's what makes Nietzsche scandalous. Um, if he could if he could find a God who he could dance with and laugh with, I think Nietzsche would celebrate that religion and he'd be the priest of it. And maybe Zarathustra in this book is his priest of the dancing God. So I don't know necessarily if it's fair to call Nietzsche an atheist, or at least in this book. Um, I think it's harder to do than people want it to be. So let's see. Moving through here. There's another interesting thing that comes in here. He often uses this language like living coffins or people who are living these dying lives. And the interesting thing about that is, again, we find that already in the Christian tradition in St. Augustine, where in the beginning of his Confessions, St. Augustine is reflecting on his life and he says, how was I born um, into this dying life or this living death? He didn't know which he should call it. And I think that Nietzsche and Augustine would have a lot in common to talk about, um, because this existentialism, is kind of a human constant. One doesn't have to be religious or irreligious to experience existentialism. It's the common lot of all of us. Um, so I think, yeah, there's one thing that he has in common with Augustine. Another one is how he often talks about like not having claws doesn't mean that you're good. Like if uh, if you don't have claws in your hand, you have no way that you could hurt someone. That doesn't mean that you're good. Um, that is also something that you find a little bit in Augustine, because he says we often think that kids are, these really sweet, angelic, peaceful creatures. And he's like, yeah, but it's just they have really weak fists and they're not very strong. But if they were strong, they'd be absolute tyrants. Um, so let's see, living coffins. Didn't Jesus tell people to leave the dead to bury the dead? He did. And at another point, he did call religious leaders whitewashed tombs. So, yeah, I think in my initial post on like good pairings to read with Nietzsche, I suggested True Detective season one, Nikos Kazantzakis, the Zorba the Greek, a handful of books that would be good pairings to read with this. But one that is a really good pairing is actually the Gospels, I would say, to read about Jesus walking into scenes and disrupting, the Pharisees and really everyone, and the Romans, everyone during his time he was going against. Um, and to ask the question whether or not uh, Christ is Nietzschean in a way, or if Nietzsche's problem is that Christianity just isn't very Christian. Maybe it's lost that creative energy that its founding prophet had. And for that matter, you can also read the biblical prophets in the Old Testament, who are constantly disrupting people. God's sending them on very interesting missions, like getting married to harlots and walking around naked and doing very disruptive activity. And yet, that's a holy calling. So maybe Nietzsche's Zarathustra isn't that far off from the prophetic pedigree. Let's see. I think I'm all caught up on some chats. So one thing that I want to call out too is on like the disruptive part. There's a way, like I said, we want him to be an atheist because it makes our job easy. If we can just peg him and say that he's an atheist, or that he's a nihilist, or he's a relativist, he's postmodern. We want to do these kinds of things because it makes our job easier. We've labeled him and now we don't need to deal with him. But I find that he constantly subverts these things if you actually are patient with him and hear him out and allow him to not merely be one side of the coin, but allow him to mature into a paradox. So one place where I find this very sharply is when he talks about on the new idol. And the new idol is the state. He says, I will speak to you about the death of peoples. State is the name of the coldest of all cold monsters. Coldly it tells lies too, and this lie crawls out of its mouth. I, the state, am the people. That is a lie. It was creators who created people and hung a faith and a love over them. Thus they served life. And he goes on, let's see here. The state tells lies in all the tongues of good and evil. And whatever it says, it lies. Whatever it has is stolen. Everything about it is false. It bites with stolen teeth. It bites easily. Even its entrails are false. Where, like this is a pretty common libertarian thing, that even its teeth are stolen with which it bites you. Where how does the government fight wars? How does it take away your rights? How does it do anything like this? Well, it's because you paid them taxes and you gave them the power to. They actually have no power aside from the fact that we gave it to them. So at this point, well, I'll just go on and let him do things, dig a little bit deeper here. State, I call it, where all drink poison, the good and the wicked. State, where all lose themselves, the good and the wicked. State, where the slow suicide of all is called life. Behold the superfluous. They steal the works of inventors and the treasures of sages for themselves. Education they call their theft, and everything turns to sickness and misfortune for them. Behold the superfluous, they are always sick. They vomit their gall and call it a newspaper. They devour each other and cannot even digest themselves. Behold the superfluous. They gather riches and become poorer with them. They want power, and first the lover of power, much money, the imprudent paupers. Oh, where the state ends, there begins the human being who is not superfluous. There begins the song of necessity, the unique and inimitable tune. Where the state ends, look there, my brothers. Do you not see it, the rainbow and the bridges of the overmen ascending? So it's very easy at this chapter to look at Nietzsche and say, this guy is absolutely an anarcho-libertarian. We know what anarcho-libertarians are. Taxation is theft. The government's bad. All this kind of stuff. And you know what's good? The free market. And let the markets decide. The markets create the value. If you just take the taxation things, the market will take care of itself. This is a very, natural transition uh, in our political spectrum. But immediately after finishing this chapter, he then talks about the flies of the marketplace. And he calls the marketplace, that people are stung over by the stings of these little men. Where solitude ceases, the marketplace begins. And where the marketplace begins, the noises of the great actors and the buzzing of poisonous flies begins too. It's full of solemn gestures, the marketplace, and people pride themselves on their great men, their masters of the hour, but the hour presses them, so they press you, and from you they want a yes or a no. Alas, do you want to place your chair between a pro and contra? Far from the marketplace and far from fame happens all that is great. Far from the marketplace and far from fame, the inventors of new values have always dwelt. Flee, my friend, in the solitude. I see that you are stung all over by poisonous flies. Flee where the air is raw and strong. So, just when you want to peg Nietzsche and say that you are an anarcho libertarian, I know what you think. He then turns around and says, well, the market isn't the answer either. People abuse the market just as much as people abuse the government. And Nietzsche says, what's the real answer? It's solitude. But the problem with both of these things, and the reason why they're in competition, is because the market wants to gather masses of consumers who give them capital, which they can then leverage to their own means and develop their business and their enterprises how they want. And that's the same thing that the government does. So whereas we want to say that these two things are separate, if they're in competition with each other, they're playing the same game. And Nietzsche says, I don't want to play either game. I don't want to be poisoned, and afflicted and bit by the stolen teeth of the government. And I also don't want to be harassed by the flies of the market. So it's interesting that just as you want to say, I know what Nietzsche is all about, he does introduce another side of the coin and then kind of invites us to set both of them aside and consider what our other options are. So Nietzsche is building two straw men, the state and the marketplace. So we find some higher reconciled truth. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I would call them both straw men. He definitely knows what their weaknesses are, and he's pointing out their weaknesses. He's definitely not steel manning them, but I think that they're both valid critiques that can be leveled against a state or a marketplace at any given time. So that's kind of how I take that. But let's see here. Moving along. Okay. Then we come to what I think are probably, not necessarily very popular parts of Nietzsche, where he talks about women and he talks about marriage. And I would say we need to keep in mind that he was a bit of a romantic failure. He didn't have many opportunities even to have a good relationship with a woman. The closest he kind of came to was Lou Salome, who he was very infatuated with. There's a famous picture of her and his friend Paul Clay, I think it was, and they're in a wagon. And she ended up refusing Nietzsche's advances, and he was very lonely and that really pained by this. But then, along comes Rainer Maria Rilke, and he actually picks up Lou Salome. They hit it off. They run off to Russia together. They have like a lovely little um, fling. They have a good romantic partnership for a while. They always stay friends, and so I we're gonna read Letters to a Young Poet from Rilke later in the year, but it's interesting that I find many very similar themes. There's existentialism and there's romanticism. There's an emphasis on you know, desire, and there's an emphasis on definitely solitude and the importance of solitude. These are all themes that you find in Rilke's poetry. And it's interesting how they're into similar themes, but you can definitely tell that uh, Rilke was more successful in love and knowing what it's like for love to be manifest. And he didn't have a perfect life by any means either, but he didn't have as much of a chip on his shoulder. He wasn't as much of a loner as Nietzsche was. So I take his comments on women with a bit of a grain of salt, and I'll let the other women on the call chime in and tell me what they thought of Nietzsche's comments on women and how their vocation is maybe different from men. But I'll just give you some pull quotes here. At one point, he says that woman is a riddle who is only solved by pregnancy. Men want danger in play, and so there is a child inside of every man. And then, and it's a woman's job to find that child in that man. And when they find their respective happinesses, happiness for a man is I will, but happiness for a woman is he wills. And women are the surface that is sensitive and easily disrupted, but men are the depths which don't move quite as easily. And then, of course, there was that old woman who said, you know, that if you're going to go off with a young woman, don't forget the whip. So, uh, again, I think it's just, if it's not obvious, I would say that, uh, you know, there's at least an intimation that a lot of Nietzsche's um, experience with women was second rate at best or second hand. Um, and I don't know necessarily, you know, I do think that men and women, you know, we do have our different expectations and we do have our different desires and we do have our different prerogatives that we would like fulfilled. So I don't think he's wrong for bringing it up. I mean, I don't I don't think that he should be a complete egalitarian. Although I kind of wonder, you know, if the Übermensch that he's describing, you know, could why couldn't the Übermensch also transcend the categories of sex with which it was born and recreate itself? I mean, this is obviously something that a critique that people bring up if they want to talk about transgenderism or transhumanism. They might critique it by saying, well, you're Nietzsche's Übermensch, you know, trying to recreate yourself. And yeah, I feel so far in the book, it's interesting that he's actually saying that there are differences between men and women, and that women might want to exercise their Übermenschheit a little bit different than men would. And it's interesting. I didn't expect to see it. I thought it was going to be more generic than that. But, you know, there's another part of it where just as much as we would want to talk about Nietzsche being the inspiration for transgressive behavior against traditional values, and so um, maybe someone who's experimenting with their sexuality in a new way or their gender identity, we might say that that's a manifestation of the Übermensch. There is a there is another sense in here in which, you know, all right, is woman a riddle solved by pregnancy? Does she need to find the child in the man? Does the man say, I will? And then the woman says, he wills? and my job is to support his will. It's interesting that you find a lot of people that also express their Übermenschheit in that way by wanting to be like a trad family. And those are also countercultural values in our culture now. So it's interesting how, they are also kind of pushing against the egalitarianism that is really common right now. Um, so it's odd to me how we can maybe call both of them Ubermensches or both of them heirs to Nietzsche, and yet how also a lot of people don't want to be called an heir to Nietzsche. People don't want to inherit his legacy or be called a nihilist or something. He's a little bit of a social pariah, and it's interesting. Yeah, I feel a lot of people don't want to be like Nietzsche, and I don't think Nietzsche wanted to be like himself. So let me get in the comments here. Guess I am strange to be able to take the insights from a writer that helped me and appreciate them for that without bothering about the cultural crap that hung over them. I love Nietzsche and I am a feminist. Well, that's great. Yeah, I know. It's just let it be what it is. I mean, he's speaking from peak to peak. Again, we don't need to spell out everything, and it's a creative book. I think it's trying to encourage you to find out how you want to create your own life and maybe create your own values. That I think that's a very nebulous term. Some people want to say, "Oh, you can't do that." But I think there's another sense in which, well, everyone does need to do that. There's a lot in our lives that are up to preference, or you get to choose your path and what you want to do. So yeah, read the whole thing, take what you like, leave what you don't. I mean, at the end of chapter 1, we find that that's what Zarathustra tells people. He says, I'm not looking for you to be my disciple. The one who is still following the teacher has learned nothing. Um, so yeah, good points on that. With the thing on 1,001 goals, this is kind of subtle. He talks about that there's a tablet of good that hangs over every people, and behold, it is the tablet of their overcomings. Behold, it is the voice of their will to power. So this is the first mention that we have in here of the phrase "the will to power," "de Wille zur Macht," and "de Wille zur Macht" is one of Nietzsche's most important concepts. So it's interesting that here we have it, and then he outlines 4 peoples, where he says, you shall always be the first and excel all others. Your jealous soul shall love no one unless it be a friend. That made the soul of the Greek quiver, and thus he walked the path to his greatness. So, first people, he says, are the Greeks. And they had their tablet of good, their law of overcoming. To speak truth and to handle a bow and arrow well, that seemed both dear and difficult to the people who gave me my name, a name which is both dear and difficult to me. So that would be the Persians, who gave him the name Zoroaster, where they say it's all about truth for the Zoroastrians. It's all about truth and lie. And he mentions also bow and arrow. So that's practical. To honor thy father and mother and follow their will to the root of one's soul. This was the tablet and overcoming of that other people. Another people hung over themselves and became powerful and eternal thereby. So that is the Jewish people, honor thy father and mother. And then finally we have to practice loyalty, and for the sake of loyalty to risk honor and blood, even for evil and dangerous things. This was a teaching another people conquered. With this teaching, another people conquered themselves, and through this self-conquest they became pregnant and heavy with great hopes. So I was wondering who that person was, and according to Walter Kaufmann's notes, those are the Germans who practice loyalty and for the sake of loyalty risk honor and blood, even for evil and dangerous things. We've certainly done that. I don't know if that's unique to the Germans. I feel like everyone everyone who has an army has used it, for those purposes at some point. But that was who Kaufman said that was. Um, then just wrapping up a few more things inside of part one, uh, to go back a little bit to what he was talking about, um, women. And he also talks not only about women, but also of marriage. And so he again, it would be easy to say that Nietzsche would probably be critical of marriage and tell us that we should, don't let something like a promise we made get in the way of what we need to do with our wills or something like this, and have no respect for the institution of marriage. Um, but that's not ultimately what we find here either. Um, when he talks about like lonely, or when he talks about children in marriage, they say, well, what do you have to say about that? And he said, let your victory and your freedom long for a child. You shall build living monuments to your victory and your liberation. You shall build over and beyond yourself, but first you must be built to yourself, perpendicular in body and soul. You shall not only reproduce yourself, but produce something higher. May the garden of marriage help you in that. So, yeah, have children, let them be monuments to your freedom. I think that's a beautiful image of uh, what children are. That two people chose each other and loved each other enough, and out of their free love comes a child. I think that's lovely. Um, but he adds this as a caveat. He says, "But this I ask you: is it the animal in the need that speaks of your wish, or loneliness, or lack of peace in yourself?" So when he talks about marriage and children, he says, yeah, let them be a monument to your freedom. He goes on with marriage and say, this is the will of two to create one who is more than what the two were. Those are all true. Like, let those be great. I think he has a problem with the institution of marriage and the institution of family insofar as they're institutions. If they're made out of free love, that is freely choosing and freely supporting, and then this is great. But if you're doing it because you're not okay with yourself, if you're doing it because you're lonely, if you're doing it because you have needs or you're an animal, he doesn't support that kind of marriage, and he doesn't support that kind of child rearing. And honestly, I don't know, would any of us? I think most people would say if you're getting into a marriage for those reasons, you're getting into a marriage for the wrong reasons. If you're having children for those reasons, you're having them for the wrong reasons. So I think that Nietzsche isn't that dissimilar from what most of us, and even what our own maybe religious or cultural traditions tell us that a marriage should be. So I don't think that's all that innovative, nor all that scandalous there. Um, yeah, he says, what the all too many, the viel zu vielen, what these superfluous call marriage. Alas, what shall I name that? Alas, this poverty of soul in a pair. Alas, this filth of soul in a pair. Alas, this wretched contentment in pair. Marriage they call this, and they say their marriages are made in heaven. Well, I do not like it, this heaven of the superfluous. Like, again, this is coming from a guy who hasn't been married, and he doesn't know that you go through these seasons, and that maybe when you go through one of those seasons and you come out on the other side, um, you're grateful for the trial that you underwent. um, so yes, I wouldn't say that marriage is purely hard work. If it's purely hard work, it's you might need to change the reasons that you're going into it, or you might need to do some reevaluation. But I also don't think that. I think that there's some reality and some virtues to endurance that is a little underrepresented here. But again, he's speaking peak to peak. He doesn't need to spell everything out for us. Yeah, he talks about a free death and that it's better to choose your death than how you go. Obviously, a fan of his like Yukio Mishima, unfortunately, took that very good to heart, and he wanted to die, ripe on the vine. He wanted to die as a young man before he became old. So that's a little bit morbid. But then again, at the end, he wanted to end part one and say that, whatever, don't take my word for it. This is for you to decide your own path. Zarathustra is just talking about his path, and he's saying the things that he feels he needs to say in order for him to become his Übermensch. And your mileage may vary. So if you have any more questions on part one, throw them in, and then we're going to go on to part two next. Nietzsche was very cognizant of the fact that it is impossible to always do the best thing by living according to any fixed rule book or tablet or good of evil, right and wrong. That is, yeah, spot on. And again, if you think of how most of our cultures come up with morality, it often starts as proverbs. Where like if you take something like let's see, if you take what's that one about the heart? Oh, absence makes the heart grow fonder. So you say that, but on the other hand, out of sight, out of mind. So which of these proverbs is correct here? Is it out of sight, out of mind, or is it absence makes the heart grow fonder? They can't both be true. And there's many, like you go through like the book of Proverbs in the Bible, there's many paradoxes there where at some point this will be what you need to do, and at other points this is what you need to do. So having like too fixed of a rule isn't going to help at all. Because then, I mean, those fixed rules are dead, but we are alive. And so we live and move and grow and change. And so we need rules that adapt with us. That doesn't mean, again, that rules don't matter, but that, yeah, they're a collaboration, There are key changes that happen in a song. But just because key changes happen, that just means that new things are right and wrong now. Before F was correct when we were in the key of C, but now we're in the key of G, and F sharp is the right note, and F is wrong. Or let me rephrase that. F would introduce a different kind of tension that maybe you don't want in this tune. The problem with Proverbs is always that they carry great truths. The opposite of a great truth is another great truth. It seems opposite proverbs apply to different situations. Absolutely. Absolutely. And talking about things that change and rules that adapt, I don't have right now a scheduled monthly Zoom. I wanted to get on the call here and elicit feedback from you. We do a monthly member Zoom, and I was doing it on the last Saturday of the month, and it was like last Saturday morning for the first 4 months of the year. But this is a new book, and it's a new season. With your summer, you might be busy on the weekends. I know I'd like to be busy too. And so maybe the weekend isn't the best time. So if you have another time that you'd like to meet face to face, and then we can have more in person, face to face conversations. Let me know when you'd like to see the next Zoom call, because yeah, right now I'm open to changing it up and trying, maybe a weekday evening or something like that. But it's been really great to get to know a lot of you face to face. to hear what you're reading, to hear what take you're having on the books. And then also, it's been really moving for me to get feedback from you and hear that the things that I'm writing are helping how you're reading and helping you see new things in books from Dostoevsky and Nietzsche and, other spots of your life. So that's been really great to hear. All you who have been paid subscribers and who've been buying me coffees, it's all been a really transformative time over the past year for me. And so, yeah, I just want to get a chance to meet more of you and have more in-person conversations. We're a little bit limited in the chat right here, but for the time being, feel free, if you haven't chimed in yet. I know that Debbie is here in Grand Rapids where I live, um, or at least in the area, in the near from me. But for the other people on the call, just let me know, where are you from? Uh, where do you live? Are you reading Nietzsche along with us right now? Are you thinking of jumping in? Did you read Dostoevsky in our last book club? Are you excited for George Eliot coming up next? Just chime in and send me a line, whatever you want it to be. Tell me what your birthday is. I don't know. All right. So now let's move into part 2. So one thing I thought was interesting about part 2 is that it opens up with the scene of the mirror, and that a little child brings him up a mirror, and then he sees this hideous devil laughing in there. And the thing is, if you're looking in a mirror, it's you who's the devil. It's you who's scaring you. Um, and so that's like how this story starts. And, then when we have at the end of the story, he has this dream of the tombs where he's like a guardian of the tombs in the graveyard. And then this big wind comes and it scares him. And then it knocks open one of the tombs. And then all of these corpses and hideous laughter of old men and children and ghosts, kind of comes out to him. And he's asking his disciples, like, I'm trying to interpret this dream. What was this? And they said, oh, well, that disruptive wind was you. So I think it's interesting in part 2 how we kind of have these two bookends of kind of like, what I said earlier about the tightrope walker and the jester, who's the hero here. It's also odd that the two people that you would call the villain, the devil in the mirror or the scary wind and all of those dead, the laughter of the dead and all of this, that it's you, Zarathustra. Like, you and your philosophy are scaring yourself. I think it's interesting that he included that, and he said that I'm scared of my own philosophy. I'm startled by the truths that I'm sharing with you. And I thought that was a very interesting stylistic choice of vignettes, but I think it's also probably Nietzsche was kind of scared about the things that he was doing, because if he takes them seriously, it really changes how he needs to live his life. I mean, he might actually have to start living his life. So let's see. We have in here on priests. Again, he is the child of a priest. He's a pastor's kid. I haven't delved into any of his biographies to find out, how much of this was based on his father and his experience of being a pastor's kid or anything. But he really lets him have it here. He says, they have called God what was contrary to them and gave them pain. And verily, there was not much of the heroic in their adoration. And they did not know how to love their God except by crucifying man. Earlier in part 1, there was a thing where In the Bible it says, "Thou shalt not kill." But the religious authorities in Nietzsche's mind were saying, "Thou shalt kill thyself." And that's what religion is about, is killing yourself, crucifying man. They did not know how to love their God except by crucifying man. I mean, that's a fair critique. I mean, I think there's, a lot of spiritual illness. Um, people can really use religion in poor ways. And he's a good diagnostic for when a religious person becomes too scrupulous, or when they think that God can't love them, or when they start to hate themselves and other people because we're all so sinful, yada, yada, yada. He goes on and he says, as corpses they meant to live. In black they decked out their corpses. Out of their speech, too, I smell the bad odor of death chambers, and whoever lives near them lives near black ponds, out of which an ominous frog sings its song with sweet melancholy. They would have to sing better songs for me to learn to have faith in their Redeemer, and his disciples would have to look more redeemed. Naked would I see them, for only beauty should preach repentance. For who would be persuaded by this muffled melancholy? So again, early on, we saw his conflict with religion, and he said that he would believe in a God who danced. And then here he says, naked I would see them, for only beauty should preach repentance. Who could be persuaded by this muffled melancholy? I think that's very true. That if you have a religion that doesn't have joy, if you have a religion that doesn't have beauty, a lot of our pain in life is just perpetuated the more we beat ourselves up and the more we fracture our psyches. Whereas, beautiful music and beautiful poetry and the beauty of creation, when religions embrace this stuff uh, and constantly put it back toward people and show, look how beautiful God is. Look how beautiful this world is. Look how beautiful you are for being a part of it. That's the stuff that can heal someone who's very psychologically and spiritually in pain, someone who's psychologically and spiritually broken. It puts them back together. Healing does that. Beauty does that healing. And I think it's that beauty that does preach repentance. Beauty does move people to repentance. Browbeating does not. Moral strictness. You have to be a particular kind of person for sheer moral strictness to be what you look for in a religion. But then again, you like it because you find it beautiful. So I don't think he's wrong. Let's see. Catch up here. Bible does not say thou shalt not kill. It's a problem with translation. Thou shalt not murder. Yes. Looks like Gutenberg has actual text report on. Oh, the rest is summaries? Well, that's a tragedy. That's okay. I won't give away too many spoilers. You can always get caught back up after this call. This is supposed to be just kind of an introduction to certain things, a companion video, so that you can get some things and take them to your own reading. So along with that beauty will preach repentance. In the next chapter, or pretty near after there, he talks about, right afterwards, he talks about virtue. And he talks about how people want to be virtuous, and people claim that virtue is so important and all of this. But beauty laughed. And thus its voice came to me and said, they still want to be paid. Where the people that are saying that virtue is all you need and we just need to be virtuous and good, and that's it's good on its own. Really, what those people are also trying to do is they would like to enjoy the pleasures of heaven and avoid the pains of hell. Um, I can't remember if this was Teresa of Avila or if it was a medieval Sufi mystic, but someone said they saw an angel with a flaming a flaming torch in one hand and a bucket of water in the other, and they said, "What are you doing with that?" And he said, "With the flaming torch, I'm going to burn down the mansions of heaven, and with the pail of water, I'm going to put out the fires of hell. And when both are destroyed, I will find out who truly loves God." Um, where most of us do it for derived means or derived ends. We want it for the pleasure, or we want it to avoid the pain, and we forget, you know, who we're doing it for, because in hindsight, we're really doing it for ourselves. And so here, uh, beauty calls it out and says, "Yeah, they they'll be as virtuous as you want them to be, so long as you pay them still." Virtue is not its own reward for many people. Um, Scooting along here, we have I love that image of a tarantula being a preacher of equality, where they they want everyone caught in the net. Uh, they're angry that things are uneven. They're vengeful. All this, and then he Zarathustra gets bit by the tarantula, and he refuses to dance, because if you dance the tarantula, it works the poison out of your system. But he decided that he wanted to not give this spider the dignity of its venom. He was like, "No, I'm fine. You're nothing but lies anyway. I don't care about your poison." So I thought that was a very effective little image that he threw in there. Let's see here. Got the Tomb song. There's beautiful stuff in that Tomb song about ephemerality and how everything is passing. Which I won't reread it because it's just all so good how it comes and goes. I find he gets a lot more lyrical in the second book. He lets the poetry take him more often. The will to power gets another mention. I'll just wrap up this idea on beauty. Excuse me, I got a tickle in my throat. Okay, so this idea on beauty, I just love this definition where for him, beauty is the visible, gracious descent of power. Thomas Aquinas called it beauty is that which when seen pleases. And that's good, but this idea of the visible, gracious descent of power, it gets a lot of that Sturm und Drang beauty and sublime romanticism take. So I love that definition he had there. All right, I love your time. Oh, this here. Yeah, mein Handball nur. So this is just a Timex weekender with a NATO strap. It's got the little light up thing, which my son loves. And I mean, it comes in handy when I need to go in a room late at night and try not to wake anyone up. But yep, that's my daily driver, as they call it. Yes, where is beauty? I must will with all my will. Where I want to love and perish, that an image may not remain a mere image. Loving and perishing, that has rhymed for eternities. The will to love, that is to be, the will also to die. Thus I speak to you, you cowards. I mean, that is great too. You know, that was in his discussion about the immaculate perception, where that people want to have this untroubled, perfect contemplation of things. And he brings in this element of like not allowing an image to be a mere image, but to love it to the point of perishing. That's what true contemplation is. And I would also say it's what true art is. That's I find that he's very good on this beauty and poetry stuff because he is doing beautiful poetry here in fits and spurts. Um, but I mean, his moments they pick you up and you walk away with them. Would that you dared to believe in yourselves and your entrails. Whoever does not believe himself always lies. Um, yeah, entrails comes up quite a bit in here. Let's see, what is that in German? Geweiden, I think it is. But he was like God's entrails. People are worshiping God's entrails after he's killed. And are you respecting your entrails? And are you listening to your entrails and believing them? And the interesting thing is that in Greek, the word for compassion and having compassion is splachnothi, and your splachnon was like your spleen and your entrails, and so um, it within like the biblical language and the wider Greek language, you have this notion of needing to it doesn't matter unless it's engaging your entrails. That's how you know that you're really onto something, when you can feel it in your gut. um, and then we have this interesting thing. So Zarathustra is against the spirit of gravity. He wants the spirit that can dance. He wants to dance with the god who can dance. He wants to fly, and then he does fly. He flies to this fire mountain, and he comes across this Feuerhund, this fire dog on the island, whose name is Hellish Noise, and um, he's he. This is kind of partially his descent to hell, but he's talking with the fire dog, and he says, "Believe me, my friend Hellish Noise, the greatest events, they are not our loudest, but our stillest hours. Not around the inventors of new noise, but around the inventors of new values does the world revolve, and it revolves inaudibly." So this dog in this volcano that everyone is, scared of, he and that people would think Nietzsche has a lot in common with. People think of him as a fiery pyrotechnic writer. He talks about wanting to destroy things, how to philosophize with a hammer. Hammers destroy things, just as volcanoes do and things like this. But on the other hand, there's all this stillness and this solitude about him, where he calls the bluff on the fire dog and says that this isn't, I know that your bark is worse than your bite. Um, so he calls the bluff on the dog, and then talks about how there's someone who's even scarier. And then he says it's the church. That is a kind of state, the most mendacious kind. Be still, you hypocritical hound. You know your kind best. Like you, the state is a hypocritical hound. Like you, it likes to talk with smoke and bellowing to make himself believe, like you, that he is talking out of the belly of reality. For he wants to be, by all means, the most important beast on earth, the state, and they believe him too. When I said that, the firehound carried on as if crazy with envy. What, he cried, the most important beast on earth, and they believe him too. Um, so the conversation through here about Nietzsche's relationship with religion, which is a perpetual thing, I think that Nietzsche, like this book, and if you want to understand like how he thinks about religion, the best place to do this would be to compare it with the Grand Inquisitor in Dostoevsky. Um, or more specifically, Book 5 of the Brothers Karamazov, where we have both of the Ivan monologues, where first we have the pro and contra, where Ivan is talking about what a terrible world God has created, was full of injustices and the suffering of children. Excuse me. But then he follows it up with the Grand Inquisitor, and in the Grand Inquisitor, Christ is held on trial by the church which he created. And for Dostoevsky, there is a sense in which the church and the state are potentially corruptive forces, and how we find them often are very corrupted forces. And so I think that there's a lot to be said here in how Nietzsche approaches things in terms of political and religious institutional authority, and the critiques that they're vulnerable to. I think Nietzsche and Dostoevsky actually agree on quite a bit in that front. And then let's see here. The one final thing that kind of call out in part 2 was that he starts to talk about well, he's got two things here. On the one hand, he talks about how, we shouldn't be, he does the scandalous thing of saying, like, we shouldn't be healing the blind, and we shouldn't be healing the lame, and removing the one thing that's wrong with them. And people are like, oh, that's scandalous. You should definitely help those people when there's only one thing wrong with them. And then he flips it on his head and he says, but there are way more inverse cripples in this world, where they're one giant mouth or they're one giant belly. They have everything of one thing, but they have nothing of other things. And this idea of an inverse cripple is an interesting thing. Like, what is your? It's not what is the one thing that's wrong with you, but what is your one virtue or your one faculty that you exercise disproportionately, and it throws your whole life out of whack. That's an interesting reflection that he put in here. But then the last thing that I wanted to talk about was how he talks about, again, he talks about how most of our understanding of justice has this sense of reward and punishment that's lying underneath it. Resentment and revenge, then, because we actually want to get to those levels. We want to have the pleasures of heaven. We want to avoid the pains of hell. We'd like to take vengeance on certain people and punish them. What actually motivates our system of justice, not only like in criminal justice, but in our own living our sense of justice, is much more revenge and than we'd like to admit. And then he talks about this absurd notion that there is an eternal punishment, that we could take this terrible motivation and then we could make it eternal, that we could hate someone so much that we would want to see them burn in hell forever, or be totally cut off from our world and our community and our wedding feast in heaven, etc., etc. It's obscene to him that we would, enshrine, as dogma, this infernal resentment and call it justice. And so then he asks, on the other hand, what kind of eternity and what kind of justice does he see? And so he says, can there be redemption if there is eternal justice? Alas, the stone it was cannot be moved. All punishments must be eternal too. And thus preached madness. And he responds, no deed can be annihilated. How could it be undone by punishment? This is what it is. eternally in the punishment called existence. That existence must be eternal, become deed and guilt again, unless the will should at last redeem himself. The willing should not become not willing. But my brothers, you know this is the fable of madness. I led you away from these fables when I taught you the will is a creator. All of this it was is a fragment, a riddle, a dead accident, a dreadful accident, until the creative will says to it, but thus I willed it. Until the creative will says to itself, but thus I will it, thus I will it. But who could teach him to will backwards? So here we start to see the intimations of Nietzsche's law of eternal recurrence. Would you live this life again as it was? Would you choose? Would you will each of your actions over again? And if I repeated it over and over again, is there a way that you could accept it and you could put your blessing on it and say, yes, I would will it to happen exactly as it did? In my good Nietzsche pairings, this is where the movie Groundhog's Day and the movie Palm Springs come in, where people find themselves in a loop and they have to live their life one day over and over again. And then they have to ask, what if this deed wasn't annihilated? What if I couldn't take it away? Could I say that I actually willed it? Could I say that that's what I wanted it to be? This is the first kind of glimmer of that we see here, which I think he needs to come back to in a more developed form later on. But that's where we'll end part 2. That's where we'll end our discussion for tonight. So do you have any other questions for me? Like, how was your reading? What did you think of this conversation? What are you taking away from it? Are you excited for parts 2 and 4? I'm really enjoying this book. It's a nice leisurely start to this to the summer. It's given me a lot to think about, and I like how he defies my expectations. I think I know Nietzsche until I start reading him, and then I find, like I said in the introduction of this, Nietzsche is a paradox perpetually on the edge of becoming a contradiction. And I love that he skates that line. Honestly, to take his opening image, he's a bit of a tightrope walker himself. So Celine, let's see. New here, but gonna start reading it. Loved your reading with the Brothers Karamazov. Thank you. Yeah, I loved all of those lectures. So if you're still reading the Brothers Karamazov, or if you're setting it down and want to revisit it, I just want to remind you all that we have 4 lectures on every book of the Brothers Karamazov that I posted in the Karamazov Book Club. Right now, I'm wrapping up the final essays to go out for that. So the preliminary investigation, the murder mystery part of the book, that should be coming out in the next day or 2. And then there'll be a special interest for a lot of people on here would be to read the Ivan philosophical character and his confrontations that he has near the end of the novel, and his evil conversations that he has to deal with, and when parts of his philosophy come home to roost. In book 11, I think a lot of that will resonate with people who are reading Nietzsche and wondering what are the implications of his philosophy, and can he live his own philosophy. So the Ivan one would definitely be one to check out. And then honestly, the prior Ivan one is another one to check out. the pro and contra chapter where he talked about rebellion and the Grand Inquisitor. Those are great monologues that are very philosophical, and you can just kind of take them out of the Brothers Karamazov, and you don't necessarily need to read the whole story to know what they're about. But if you're reading Nietzsche and you're interested in existentialism and questions of freedom and responsibility, all of that kind of stuff, Ivan is a great conversation partner for those conversations. Um, Also, Zosima. Zosima is a very interesting character to read alongside Nietzsche because I don't know, like, if Nietzsche told Father Zosima the kind of God or the kind of church he doesn't believe in, I don't think Father Zosima would say, I believe in that. I think he would say with Nietzsche, I don't believe in that God either. I don't believe in that religion either. Um, there were some other things in here about um, someone going down and saving people from death and from hell and forgiving like all their debts. Let me. Well, there was this one part where Nietzsche says, I have, like all these problems with how you guys do justice. But then he hangs out in the air this question, what if there was a judge that would take all the guilt unto himself and acquit everyone he judged? And I think Father Zosima from the Brothers Karamazov would chime in and say, he did. His name is Christ. And I try and do that in my own life by taking the sins of all and making me the only guilty person in the world and forgiving everyone else for their wrongs that they've done. And yeah, so I kind of feel like, who would Nietzsche be if he read Zosima? I mean, we know that he read Dostoevsky. I don't know if he ever read the Brothers Karamazov, but I believe that he did read Crime and Punishment, and he was influenced by that. But I'll just read this one section from, what is this chapter called? Oh, on the Soothsayer. Verily, like a thousand-fold children's laughter, Zarathustra enters all death chambers, laughing at all the night watchmen and guardians of the tomb, and at whoever else is rattling with gloomy keys. You will frighten and prostrate them with your laughter, and your power over them will make them faint and wake them. And even when the long twilight and weariness of death come, you will not set in our sky, you advocate of life. New stars have let us see, and new wonders of the night. Verily, laughter itself you have spread over us like a colorful tent. Henceforth, children's laughter will well forth from all coffins. Henceforth, a strong wind will come triumphantly to all weariness of death. Of this, you yourself are our surety and soothsayer. Verily, this is what you dreamed of, your enemies. That was your hardest dream. But as you woke from them and came to your senses, thus they shall awaken from themselves and come to you. So I read that and I think that's one of the most beautiful descriptions of the harrowing of hell by Christ that I've ever heard, where Christ is risen and um, there's no one dead remaining in the tombs. When it says, children's laughter will come out of all coffins, and even your enemies will be risen. And it's all through your laughter and your joy. I mean, it's an apocalypse of delight that he describes here. And this is one of his disciples. Thus spoke the disciple, and all the other crowded around Zarathustra and took hold of his hands and wanted to persuade him. But the thing is, he looked a long time into the face of the disciple who had played the dream interpreter, and he shook his head. So I was like, wait a minute. You have this beautiful scene of everyone being reconciled and healed and forgiven and risen to life by your laughter, and then he shakes his head. I'm still not sure exactly why. So I need to look into that a little bit. Let's see. Okay. What are my thoughts on Notes from the Underground? That is a very small book that I read a long time ago. And I remember it's a very bitter individual um, who doesn't like how society is structured. He doesn't like really anything. And he wishes that he could live life in his own way. And I have to admit, that's about all I remember it. But it's so short. It's only like 100 pages. So that is one that I was going to maybe reread with this. It's in my good Nietzsche pairings because obviously Nietzsche's Zarathustra is not satisfied with life as it is and wants to live it in a different way. So that's a good one to put on your list. Um, Hoping to join for part 2 of this book. I just finished a slow read of Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet, so I will join for that. Absolutely. Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet, that is a desert island book for me. Um, I practically I practically have it memorized at this point. I've read it so much. And it doesn't get old. I get something new from it every time. Um, so yeah, uh, that's all for questions. I think I'm all caught up there. I just want to thank you all for coming out and hanging on the call. We covered books 1 and 2 pretty thoroughly. If you haven't started reading it, feel free to give this lecture another reading. Comb through the transcript. If there are other parts that you stumble upon and you don't know what's going on with the hellhound or what's going on with the tightrope walker, you can look in the transcript and look it up and then go to that part of the video and watch it. So all of these lectures are really good resources for having a reading companion as you're reading it uh, at your own pace and on your own schedule. I'm going to do another one for this where we're going to cover the final part of the book. So that's parts 3 and 4. And I believe that's going to be on the third Wednesday of June. And so then we'll wrap up the book. And then after that, the following month, we're going to start reading George Eliot's big novel, Middlemarch, which is having a great moment over the past year and a half, I'd say, on Substack. So if it's been something you wanted to read for a while, this is a good time. We're going to break it out over 4 months. So it'll be really easy to dip in and take in small chunks. I'll do companion essays with that one, and we'll do calls like these so that you won't get left behind. You'll always, we'll make sure that we cover all the big points along the way. Um, and yeah, then Till We Have Faces and Rilke is going to end the year after we do that. But until then, we're in Nietzsche season. We're going to have a Zoom call. So if you'd like to have like a little bit more of a face-to-face conversation, I'm going to be sending out that link for the next one, and that'll come in the chat. And then it'll be great to talk to you face to face, hear some other books that you're reading. I just treat it like pretty much office hours, where we have like an hour or so where we can talk about really anything that you're reading or anything that you think is interesting. And yeah, looking forward to that. So, Debbie, I met you when I was discussing Till We Have Faces, and you came and joined my convo. I remember that day. You were in the coffee shop, and I heard someone talking about Till We Have Faces, and I had to insert myself. So yeah, in November I'll get a chance to, and we'll get a chance to talk to a lot more people about that. But until then, I'm gonna let you get back to your day, get back to your evening, wherever you are. And thanks for joining me for our first discussion of Also sprach Zarathustra. Looking forward to talking to you next month, and I'll be putting out a few more leisurely posts that explore some of these themes. Um, and we'll pick it up next month. So feel free to send me a message, write in the comments, send me a note. Um, However you want to do that. It's great to meet you and hear more about your world and what you're thinking. So thanks for reading and thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time. All right. Good night, everyone.